Hello and welcome to the Road Monkey podcast. For those who have listened for a while, you will know that my background is sport, and the wider impact that it has on society is something that I'm really passionate about. Today we explore a story of how a dream that was sown in Sheffield blossomed into a sports club that delivered incredible community impact alongside Olympic success. From being gifted a few trampolines, coach Paul Greaves and a wonderful team around him grew a programme from a few youngsters exploring the sport of trampolining through to a thriving club that many years on delivered not one but 2 Olympic medals and inspired a whole generation of young athletes. Our conversation meanders across a range of subjects, including teaching and coaching, professionalisation of the sector, person-centred coaching, CPD and much more. This episode is a sporting journey but also a human journey, and Paul is still exploring his purpose and place in the world of sport. So let's get into it, and episode 87 of the Road Monkey podcast, featuring double Olympic medal winning coach Paul Greaves. Hello Paul, and welcome to the podcast. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. Really pleased to be joining you today.
Well, it's been a long time coming. I think our paths first crossed in 2019, maybe even 2018, I want to say, and you've been on a bit of a journey since then. So do you want to give our listeners and viewers out there just a bit of an introduction as to who you are and a bit about your story?
Yes, so I'm Paul Greaves. I'm an international trampoline coach. Started coaching trampoline when I was 18 years old, set up my own club with the intention of trying to have a performance club in Sheffield, and it grew and grew and grew. And ultimately, the coach to Bryony Page, who's double Olympic medalist now, from silver in Rio to a bronze in Tokyo. She was then world champion and European champion last year. So it's been a great journey. That's it in a nutshell. So yeah, I'm incredibly sort of proud of what's happened and what I've achieved as a coach, and looking forward to this next sort of journey moving forward.
Well, we'll pick up on what's coming in the future, but let's go back to the start, because club sport is something that a lot of people find a passion for very early on in their life. So what was that kind of first experience like for you, and how did it kind of transition into you forging a career, if you like, in it?
So I remember when I was 15 and I went to a career advisor at school, and you put on the form like what careers you were interested in. And so I said that I wanted to be a coach, and that's what I wanted to do as a job. And I was told by the career advisor that wasn't a profession, and that maybe I should think about something such as teaching. And my PE teacher at the time, a lady called Jenny Bowker, when I basically sort of told her, she was like, she says, if you believe in something, you go for it. She had such belief in me. And so I sort of came away from that more determined than ever, just to go, do you know what? I'm going to do this. I am going to coach. So you couldn't coach like by yourself until you'd got your level 2 qualification. You couldn't do that till you were 18. So as soon as I was 18, I got myself enrolled on a coaching course. I did it in Birkenhead, and got my qualification, and was like, right, I need to set a club up now. What do I need? Well, I need some trampolines and I need a space. And then I need some participants. And my coach, Barry Peaker from Huddersfield, from Kirklees Rebound, he gave me 2 spare trampolines that they had, the old trampolines. And he said, like, he actually was a lorry driver, and he put them on the side of a lorry, brought them over to Sheffield, and we set up in a little school hall. And the first week we had 8 members. The next week we had 16 members. Then I had to think about adding a second hour on, and then that was the catalyst. And then suddenly we were operating, and this is over a number of years, we were operating out of several sports facilities in some of the school sports partnerships. And we had a huge club. So we had we had hundreds of members that were coming every week. Some people just an hour a week. Other people were training 6 days a week. So we had a full community sports club. And I had a team of coaches around me that were fantastic, and volunteers and officials. But we ended up with sort of like a huge sort of like community amateur sports club that covered all different areas. So, no matter who you were, what your ability level was, age, doesn't matter. Like there was a session for you. And, you know, if you wanted to try and push to be the next sort of like, you know, world-class athlete, then we wanted to provide that opportunity as well. And that was my role within the club. And that's what I always wanted to achieve. I wanted to achieve top level success. But in order to do that, I had to build a foundation that would support that. So for me, the first part of the journey was about developing and establishing the club, and getting the club nice and strong so that it would support that top end of the pyramid. Because understanding that, like, you know, a pyramid is based like that, and without foundations, it topples. So the foundations were the priority, and getting those sort of strong was the key thing. And I think that's what, as a club, we did really well. And yeah, so we didn't have like the conveyor belt of, you know, GB athletes at the start, and that's, you know, we weren't a performance club, we were a club for all, and with an element of performance within it. So yeah, I think I've just taken you on a bit of a journey there. But
I think, and the interesting thing from like a coaching point of view is if you remove trampolining or even gymnastics from it and actually talk about just coaching in the community, I think there's tons of coaches out there who can empathize with those challenges of trying to build that foundations, the stability, having the people around you. So what were kind of some of the early challenges, if you like, that you had? So you've got your trampolines in your first few hours up and running, but how do you go from that to kind of where you left it?
Well, one of the key things for trampoline is height. So like in terms of the height of the facilities, and that's something that we really struggled with. So we literally outgrew our first facility and the kids were hitting the roof. So that was like one of the first challenges, is like, okay, we've got a club. It's, you know, we're doing really well in the centre that we've got, but our kids are literally outgrowing the centre. They're hitting the roof now. So one of the main challenges was actually facilities. And, you know, Sheffield is known for being the city of sport. It's got loads of different, you know, facilities, but they're busy, you know, we're full, and we couldn't get in. So, you know, we found an old sports centre that was, you know, in quite bad condition. Well, it's in quite a bad condition. You know, if it rained, the roof would leak and things like that. But it served a purpose for us, and we set up. We moved our trampolines into the sports centre, and then the club grew again. We then outgrew that facility in terms of the time that was available to us, so we had to search for somewhere else. So we moved to a complete different area, about 30 minutes away from which I was worried. I was thinking people might not come with us, and you know, but they did, and the club grew again. And yeah, it was trying to get the facilities that were regular. And then as we got better and better and better, I needed more time, and you know, I needed time and space for the recreational participants, and I needed time and space for the competitive side of the program. And so time and space was always the issue. So I was always looking for like a building or something that we could move into, but it was either that the building was the roof was too low, you know, because I saw tons of buildings that would have been perfect floor space but not have the height. Or it was a huge old industrial space that we'd have never been able to afford to like heat the building, because it was like, you know, enormous. So there was just not the right space. And then we got linked to a school sports partnership who were having a brand new sports centre built as part of the school. And there was us, volleyball and women's basketball. And they wanted to provide a home for us, and that was the best thing for us. We still needed more time, but we could access it 6 days a week, and that allowed us to grow, develop, and, you know, get the success that we've had now. And yeah, it was sort of getting the space and the time and the facility. That was one of the key things. And, you know, as you'll know from being in a swimming background, pool time is precious. Like, and, you know, the times what would be perfect for you to train are probably the times where the public would use it. So yeah, that was one of the key things for us, getting the facilities and the space and sort of having the time to actually properly develop the club.
So for a lot of clubs out there, and exactly what you've alluded to there, that journey of going to a point where you've actually got a fit for purpose program, in a program that's constantly getting bigger and stronger. What were some of the things you were doing in between those phases to actually almost manage the growing pains? Because, you know, a lot of sports teams out there, may not have the opportunity to move half an hour down the road and those sorts of things. So what were some of the things that kind of kept you guys going in between? How did you manage that?
So I was constantly applying for different funding bids. So like to try and get extra equipment in the facilities that we got, because at one point we only had 2 trampolines, then we grew to 4 trampolines. And then I just kept applying for different pots of funding from everywhere. So I was doing a lot of research to try and find out what was available in the local areas, but also what we could apply for nationally. So I grew within the centre that we were in at the time by increasing the equipment. So, we doubled up on time. So I got recreation in as well as the competitors. But it was really trying to find out sort of like the pots of funding, and then constantly sort of just, going to different people and like trying to raise our profile basically, with the local councils and things like that. And so a lot of my role that I saw at the time was to try and raise the profile of the sport and the club. So I would just constantly be sending things to like the local media, and sort of saying, look, this is a club, and look how much we've grown in the first sort of few years. Like, these kids are engaged in physical activity. They're, sort of off the streets, and they're doing really positive things. They're traveling up and down the country. So it was just trying to raise the profile. That was one of the key things for me. And then also just accepting support from other clubs that were more established and that were bigger. And so, maybe, at a weekend we would go and visit those clubs, and, we'd have the opportunity to go to my old club in Huddersfield, which was an hour away. But, some of my kids would go up there and train as well. So we just made it work.
A lot of this sounds like just good sports development work, because if you look at, just picking up on the points you've made already, we're already talking about funding providers, both local and national, county sports partnerships, links with schools, colleges, universities and other clubs. And actually, I do think the sports world can get quite siloed, and usually within its own sport. And actually, people need to kind of look beyond sometimes their own shoreline and actually go, well, look, what else is out there? And if, it's a bit niche for me because of swimming, but if I look at the number of swimming pools in this country and then compare it to the number of, say, non-public pools, so school pools is a great example. You almost double the pool count in this country, but actually how many conversations go on between, say, a swimming club and a school? And in your situation, that relationship actually ended up getting to a point where you've got a school that's willing to host a number of sports teams and create a home. And I'm pretty sure in 2019, it might have been 2018, I've lost all track of time, but I came down and saw that when I was coming up to a competition in Sheffield. And when you look at the way that facility was designed, integration and conversations working well together seemed to kind of ooze out of every single part of it.
Yeah, I mean, when we had the sort of gymnastics centre built, it was all part of a bigger picture. So it was like one of the first of its kind in terms of linking health, well-being, participation, and education, and also performance sport. So I've always, when I've looked at things, I've always tried to look at it from a wider perspective rather than just from performance, because I think you need all aspects of it. But also, if we're looking at performance sport, one of my key things as an elite coach was always about the person first and foremost, and it was like looking at like all aspects of them. So their health, their well-being, was priority, way above performance. And I think, by linking all of these different things together, it sort of works. If you just look at it with tunnel vision, you only see one side of things and one perspective. Whereas for me, like with the club, it was looking at like all aspects, linking with physiotherapists, linking with nutritionists, psychologists, schools. That was key. And I think the schools thing for me was the catalyst to our success, because we had such a good relationship with schools that actually it was a real positive. And we would have coaches go into schools and do workshops, or go and work with the schools teams that were going into the local schools competitions and things like that. And we also, one of the things that we did do as a club is we took on the schools competition program and we ran it for the schools. So it took it sort of like a thing, like another thing that they got to deal with. It took it away from them, and it was something that they could come and enjoy. And it was, I remember the last schools competition we ran, it was in Sheffield. It was just unbelievable. We had 623 competitors. That's 623 kids across Sheffield that all came to do all lower level, like it was all like participation level. But that for me was, take away all the other success in terms of like the Olympics, things like that. That for me was one of the biggest successes, I think, of our journey, in the fact that we'd reached to so many people that 623 secondary school kids wanted to do trampoline and wanted to come and compete at trampoline. I mean, that's just incredible. So yeah, and that was, some of them were our club members and everything, but that's where we found, potentially new athletes and things like that. And we used to always have like anybody that sort of did well, we'd say, "Oh, come along to a session and we'll, see what you think, and like we can put you in this group or that group." And it was our biggest way of recruiting the future talent, really.
So, and I think also, just kind of picking up on the point there about that community and that network, is that when you then end up moving down into this really high performance route and you start getting those successes, everyone feels a part of that. And I feel like, looking at certainly the people I've had on both the podcasts, but I've just spent time around over the years, if you have a very well integrated program where actually people give a damn about the first person coming in the door, just starting their lessons or, beginner programs, all the way through to the person who's perhaps winning an Olympic medal, everyone comes on that journey with you. And I feel like when you hit the rough days, and there's plenty of them, as I'm sure we'll dive into in a bit, but you have more backup. People are prepared to like pull strings for you and help out and do what they can to help them, the performance, get to another level.
Yeah, I mean, totally. That's something that I've always tried to instill in the athletes that I've coached, is to be a good person first and foremost. It's like you've got to have good qualities, and to always treat everybody with respect. It doesn't matter if somebody's come in for 1 hour a week or something like that. It's like, don't ever put yourself up there on a pedestal. Say hello to people, and and certainly for me as a lead coach, that recreation person that's come in for 1 hour a week is helping support and fund these athletes that are coming 6 days a week, because it reduces the amount that they have to pay per hour. So they're so important, and they're so precious to us. And also they deserve excellent coaching, just like an elite person is. And I think this is something which gets lost within coaching, is that you can have outstanding high performance recreational coaches. And when I say high performance, I mean good, high quality, excellent coaches. But just because they're coaching at a lower level in terms of the difficulty level or complexity level, it doesn't mean that they're not an excellent coach. And somebody who I ran the club with, who doesn't get any credit or success that like I have, her name's Joanne James, formerly Crowther, and she was the backbone to the club. That, yes, she was seen locally, but nationally, internationally, it was always my face, because I was coaching the elite guys. But she was running, loads of rec classes, and she managed the club really, really well. And we wouldn't have had the success without her. But those coaches don't often get recognised because they're in the background, but they're still equally phenomenal coaches. It's just that they're not working at like Olympic or world level.
Yeah, and I think there's a huge gap there. And we talk about, Coach of the Year awards and all those sorts of things. But I think until sport can get its head round, and I'm, happy to say this is going to be a nice controversial comment, but until we can get away from this mentality that the higher you perform, the more recognition you get, is such a linear way of looking at sport. And it's like, I genuinely think that if we can do an infinitely better job in terms of targeting our resources at that base level, funnily enough, in 5 years' time or 10 years' time, which is ultimately, if you're, say, a UK sport, you want to see success over long periods of time. You don't just want, throw the kitchen sink at something for 6 months, get a good result, and then a week later it all falls apart. You want that sustained investment and sustained capacity for delivering performance. Then you have to start at the bottom. And I'm always baffled when you get, in my sport, say, a lot of programs might have a level 1 teacher or someone who's got very limited experience working as the first port of call with kids that are trying to find their way in the sport. And sometimes that's the nature of, who's available and all these sorts of things. But I think, even when I used to visit the national teams, they would always say, sometimes we spend 6 months correcting things that should have been picked up when they were 10 years old, and this is 18 now, and they're on a world-class program, and they still can't do the basics because actually no one's ever picked them up on it because they don't get that high focus coaching until they're maybe far too far down the performance path. So it's an interesting space.
I think also that's something where I'd really like to see coaching professionalized, a bit like a teacher wouldn't be allowed in the classroom without going through a degree and getting a certain amount of knowledge around how people develop and things like that. And I think whilst coaching courses are continually improving, you could have somebody that has been on a few weekends to gain their coaching qualification, and they learn how to develop a skill and how to safely progress it or regress it, or like how to do a technique or something like that. But yeah, we've often got a lot missing from those coaching courses, which, say for example, if somebody was coming on to one of my degrees, that's, sport development with coaching, they're going to have much more detailed information about coaching itself and, what are the qualities of, an excellent coach, what would it look like? And also understanding sort of like how that develops over the years for a person, and they've got all of that information just like a teacher would with regards to doing teacher training. But in this country you can become a coach, and I'm not saying this is a wrong system, but I think that we need to, if we want those things corrected at the very, very start, we need high quality coaching from right away from level one. So again, I think we need to maybe rethink coach education and what is included in those different courses. For me, that's something that I would definitely change, which is why I'm so pleased to see sort of more degrees happening with sport coaching, sport development with coaching, and we're seeing coaching as a profession, and something that is researched, and we've got lots of research on sort of like coaching, both positive, negative, and information that will help us as coaches. So it's like I would like to see it go more down that route and much more professionalism with regards to it.
Yeah, and I think also there's a piece in there around, like you mentioned, the ability for, let's say you've got an athlete that's training, 10 hours a week, which is typical in certain sports for a lot of young children. And they're working with somebody who has perhaps got 40 hours of on-the-job qualifications, if you like. And actually, I find that, like you mentioned there with teaching as a prime example, would you imagine like you've got an 18-year-old kid and they do 2 or 3 weekends and then you go, right, hop into the classroom, you're okay to look after primary school kids now. The parents would balk at that idea. And yet I'm not knocking teachers in any way, shape or form, but I would argue that sport has just as much influence on those young people, especially when they are doing more and more of it. So it's so important that people understand the wider implications of not just coaching, but athlete mental health, well-being, all of the other dynamics and social skills that young people develop. And you can't teach that on a weekend course.
No, you can't. I mean, even things like stage of maturation and understanding sort of like, when to back off and the sorts of things to do. I mean, things like the youth sport development, youth physical development model and things like that. There's lots of different things out there, which will provide us with information of what to do when, but there isn't the time on the coaching courses to cover all of that detail. But if you've got a kid that's training 5-6 days a week, you need to make sure that they're physically developing appropriately so that they don't damage their body. So that's just from a physical, but you also need to understand, the changes which happen, so that actually, their emotions and their feelings change and things like that. And how do you deal with those and support them through that time? It's not just about technical coaching and saying, right, go again, yeah, change this, change that, change the other. It's so much more coaching. And I think that's where, certainly in this country now, we've got to start, sort of having more education around all of these different areas. Like you mentioned, sort of like health, well-being, those aspects of it. We can't just go and coach a kid 6 days a week without understanding those things. And not just a kid, an adult as well. But if they're in an elite system, we've got to have good knowledge around those different areas, because often until they get to GB level, there isn't the support mechanisms there in terms of a separate strength and conditioning coach that's an expert in that field, a separate psychologist who's an expert in their field, nutritionists and so on, doctors, physios. You don't have that. It's you as a coach if you're in a club environment. So, for me personally, I took myself to university. So I was 26 and I was like, got to my high performance coaching course, finished that. And I was like, there's got to be more to this than that. Like, there's got to be more. So I went and did a sports science with coaching degree at Sheffield University. And I was like, oh, right, well, this visualization imagery thing, let's give this a go. And all right, okay, this is a good nutrition plan. And my athletes are burning so many calories a week. Are they replenishing those calories with the right foods and things like that? So these, I would do nutrition workshops for parents and things like that, all based upon my education and learning. But again, that was me as a person going, I need to know more to make sure that I, do right by these people that I'm working with. And not, having said that, not everybody would be in a position to do that either. So I totally get that. But for me, I was lucky enough to go, right, okay, I can afford to do this. Like, I can juggle coaching and work and everything. So I was self-employed freelance coach. So I could juggle and mix things around. But education was the key for me, and learning about all the different areas.
Yeah, and I think there's, and I try and be as balanced as possible when I have these discussions, and I understand the flip side of it in the nature of the revenue challenges that a lot of the governing bodies have in sport, and to be able to offer a coaching course for X number of days for X fee, whatever it is, that's a very clean business transaction, if you like. And I understand that in the sense of, if your funding over the last 10 years has gone from, say, 20 million to 10 million to 5 million to 2 million, for example, you have to make up the difference through business activities. And at the end of the day, like, I've been chatting to a few people from different parts of the world when it comes to coaching. And, one of my friends who was out in Hungary said, you sign up as a coach and you are on a course for a year. You are monitored for a year and you learn for a year. There is no cutting the corners, if you like, on that. Whereas, and I think there's an interesting space there, because it's like, well, as an organization, are you going to quadruple the resources you invest in something with a similar financial return? Absolutely not, because you haven't got the capacity. But equally, I do think that would change the mindset of what coaching is perceived. Instead of, well, you just do a weekend course and you can get your level 2, of actually going, no, if you want to do this as a professional, then you need to treat it as a professional career. And like you said, a lot of clubs aren't in the position to do that. A lot of sports are built on volunteers, where their level 2 qualification is because actually they're part-time coaching, full-time day job, full-time parent on top of that. And actually they don't have the capacity to just, go off and do a degree. So I have a very balanced viewpoint on it. But equally, like you said, if we don't head towards it, you're still going to have ill-equipped people supporting potentially not just future stars, but, future workforces and all those sorts of things. And there's a real challenge there.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think this is something where we've got to take another look at it and go, right, how can we do this? I mean, there's all sorts of potentials, like, why can't we, or why can't national governing bodies link with education partners or things like that, or universities? And, it's like, there's definitely ways of doing it. I think it's easier to not do it because, it's less hoops to jump through, if you like. But I think there's so many different ways of, like, linking everything together. So, if you've got an education provider that understands about, developing people and things like that, you could have experts in sports psychology, experts in nutrition, that, are providing information for coaches. There's got to be a way of linking it. And I'd like to see that in the future, but whether it happens or not, I don't know. And it's like you say, is it purely from a business point of view? But I'm looking at this just from a coaching perspective and not thinking about the business side of things. I'm thinking, if you want to be a really good coach, you've got to have good education. And when I say that, I don't mean that you've got to be a high flying superstar. You've just got to have the knowledge of the different areas in order to be able to support and develop somebody. And that's equally as important for, a recreational participant. How do you manage your group? How do you, when you've got 12 kids on 2 trampolines, or you have how many kids in a pool, how do you engage each one of those? And, what are some of if you've got challenging behaviors, how do you deal with that? As opposed to sort of saying, don't do this, don't do that. We know that that's, not the best way forward. So how do you develop those things? And, you know, you can't just learn that on a coaching course. It's got to be something with experience, time, but also education. You know, a teacher learns about, you know, how to manage a classroom, how to differentiate, how to sort of like sort of engage each person and also progress them on at their rate that they need to move on. And I think we don't cover enough of that really in coaching.
I think there's an interesting point there as well about, I guess, where we are now. And I say this, we're in 2023. If we'd have been having this conversation pre-pandemic even, you'd have got a lot of people going, blue sky thinking, you know, flexible learning, different ways of learning. How can we possibly do that? I would argue now, if we could list out 10 things that were absolutely crucial to be a good performance community coach, if we like, or a high performing community coach, and say, hey, understanding of psychology, understanding of nutrition. You know, I could throw things out like Zoom. I could throw things out like Audible. I could throw things out like podcasts and actually say, I think there's a way that you can actually get resources very cost effectively to a very large amount of people, but you have to be willing to turn more than 1 degree at a time. You have got to do an about turn. And like you say, I think we do need to take a much bigger look at it. And are people prepared to have that conversation? Is that a comfortable conversation for people to have? Probably not.
Yeah, it's a challenging one, isn't it? It's really challenging. But again, I think it's something that people just need to sort of keep pushing the agenda, really. And I think, you know, certainly sort of like my role moving forwards as a, you know, working in higher education, it's like, you know, I want people to become professional coaches and things like that, but I want, you know, and I want them to go through the route where they get all of the knowledge and can, you know, coach with informed practice. And I think, you know, we've just got to keep trying to move things forward. And I think we're getting there. You know, it's taking time, but I think there's a lot more awareness around that now.
Definitely. And I think we are heading in a direction where we can be more optimistic. And as I said, I think the last 3 years, although there's been obviously some horrendous challenges for all sectors, including sport, there's also been some massive advancements in the way that people engage in stuff. So that's extremely positive. And I guess I want to leap back a little bit more into your journey, because, you know, you've gone out and you've got this additional education and support. You've sourced different facilities as the club's grown and developed. Can you talk us through that point where performance starts to become more and more apparent? Because I think there's people use the word performance very loosely. Certainly in my sport, I think every program in the country has a performance squad. But actually, when you start getting onto kind of world-class level athletes, talk us through that transition for you personally as a coach.
So at first I felt like an imposter. So when I started getting kids that were sort of getting onto GB teams or being selected, and you got invited to your first squad camp, and you see people that you've, you know, looked up to and idolized and respected all these years, and you think, how am I even in this room with those people? Like, and I think sort of going to those first squads and sort of seeing sort of like how people were and things like that, that was when I started to realize that there was a change happening, and that maybe I needed to change my coaching if I wanted to be staying at this level. And so for a short period of time, I was thinking, oh, no, I need to be much more serious. I need to be, you know, like, you know, focus much harder on sort of just performance and things like that. And so there was a bit of a time where I sort of forgot about the club as such, and I was really focusing on just the performers that were doing like really well. And then, you know, you get told you've got to do this, you've got to do that, you've got to do the other if you want to be at this level. And then I was thinking, well, actually, who am I as a person and who am I as a coach? And some of my athletes, when we go to squads and things like that, they'd be like, why do you act differently when you're at the squads? Like, you're so different when you go to, and I'm like, I just feel like I had to put on a front, or like I couldn't really be who I was. Because in our gym, I was quite sort of, you know, we had fun and we had a laugh, and it was enjoyable. Whereas when I went to squads, I was deadly serious and like, you know, it was like professional, and actually I wasn't really being true to who I was. So I sort of started to think, actually, you know, I need to be more me, like, and just, you know, sort of friendly, calm, happy. And so then my athletes started doing even better. And, you know, I had some really good athletes coming through, which was almost a little bit of justification about my methods and how I do things, like that, you know, it can happen in that way. But yeah, it was that time where I remember one of my junior boys, and I sort of held him back from competition a little bit. He transitioned from diving, transferred over from diving. So I wanted to give him a bit of time because the twisting technique was different. We do straight arm twists, and they do wrap like that. So it was like I just wanted to take my time with him, even though he was really talented. And then there was a moment we were in Holland at a competition. I took a group out to do his friendly international. And everybody was looking at him and, where have you got him from? And it was just like, he's been in my club for like 2 years, and I've just worked like technically, and that's when I started getting recognised as a coach. And for some of the work that I was doing, people were seeing my athletes with like good quality skills and, good technique. And and that was just a catalyst. And then, you get one British champion, you get another British champion, and it's just, as the success grows, more people see that success and can see that they could maybe, achieve it. And then the club sort of changed into, we have the community sport side of things. And then we've got the performance side of things, and we need to make sure that they've got all areas covered, physically, psychologically, health, well-being, all those types of things. So the club started becoming quite different because, we were wanting to provide fun and enjoyment, and for this side of things, we wanted to provide an opportunity for athletes to fully go to their potential. If they wanted to push to world class level, then we could. And that's when I sort of realised that everybody's needs within the club are different, and we couldn't just do one thing. We've got to do a variety of different things, and I think that was the strength of our club.
So timeline wise, talk us through that journey up to Rio, because I think, and I say this from my own experience, I was going through my study and sporting journey in the run up to London. And that was kind of my last year as a participant, more so, certainly training full time. And I looked at it in a very different light to say 2016, when I was watching it through the eyes of more of a coach. But actually being a coach on that kind of journey, what was that chunk of time when your club has now got your foundations in place? You've now got a group of more high performance focused athletes, and you're in the run up to, perhaps not knowing it at that point, an Olympic Games. What was that period of time like? And talk us through some of the key points that do stand out in memory.
So we started the club in November 2000, and sort of like for the first few years, it was predominantly just recreational participants and things like that. But even then, our recreational participants that were doing regional competitions were doing well, and they were sort of doing really good. It was then, as we started to get better as a club, probably like 2005, we started to have people that were getting up to national level. So like 5 years, they were getting up to sort of national level and getting into certain finals. And then it was like 2006, 2007, where we got some really good kids coming through. And that's when I went to university in 2007 to do my undergraduate degree. And sort of like from 2007 there on, like we got athletes on squads and programs, and we started to be in the mix with regards to things like looking at the Olympics. So Beijing was the first one, and seeing sort of like the athletes go to Beijing, and some of the athletes that I were coaching were not that far off them, and I was thinking, right, we could really do this. And so I had sort of several sort of squad members that were sort of moving up through the ranks. And then sort of from, I would say 2010 was the year I started, 2009, 2010 was the year I started working with Bryony. And we'd got a really good established club. We had a nice culture, a nice ethos, and we got some good level performers. Bryony came to sort of join us, and I just saw something in her that I'd not seen in other people before. And it was just something really special. And that was the time when I was like, right, we need to get this club program right. We've got the potential for athletes to get to, that top level now. And so from then onwards, it was a case of just making sure that, no stone was left unturned, that we'd got everything we needed. We had enough training time, and it was a lot of juggling for me because, I'd suddenly gone from having maybe 5 or 6 athletes on one trampoline to thinking can't have more than 3 or 4 because the height they're jumping and they're not going to get the time. So it was restructuring the clubs and constantly checking in and reflecting. So there's a lot of reflection. So I would be changing the squads around all the time, mixing things up, making sure that everybody had got what they needed. And sort of from then onwards, from like 2010 onwards, it was a great journey in terms of thinking about what happened. I had sort of when my athletes got to junior European final, I had other athletes at like junior world competitions that were doing well. And I got a really nice team and just such a nice group of people. It was a pleasure to coach them. And then obviously going into Rio, I knew that Bryony was capable of going to an Olympic Games, and that brought huge pressure as well because as a coach, you have got this athlete that has the potential to be at that level. They've shown that they can be at that level and beat the best in the world. And, I have a huge responsibility to make sure that I do everything within my power to provide what this athlete needs. So again, that's quite stressful. And also being in those processes is very stressful. Because, at the time we had several girls that were amazing. So several women that were just phenomenal that could all be in a world final, every single one of them, but only two women, maximum 2 women per country get to go to an Olympic Games. So you've got the mix of 5 or 6 people that could do it. And in 2012, it didn't happen for Bryony, and she'd come 4th in the world in 2010. She'd been in World Cup finals, top 5 in the World Cup finals and things like that, and then didn't make the games. And that was when I really thought, okay, we've got to do everything possible now to reach that. And so we just really committed to, and I was like, we've got to have a proper facility where we've got, like dedicated space and time. So that's when I really started pushing to try and get money for a purpose-built facility, and we did get that in 2016, but that was after Bryony's medal. But yeah, it was something that was important to me then, that I wanted something where, if the kid wants to come in for an hour a week and train and and just have fun, they can do that. But if somebody wants to come and actually be really serious and dedicate a serious amount of their time to the sport, they can do that. So yeah, that was something, and we've now got a purpose-built facility in Sheffield. I know I'm not there anymore, but yeah, it's a bit of a legacy for me, that one.
So talk about that last 12 months leading up to it, because I think you've alluded to it already, the responsibility that comes with that. And I'm not familiar with the qualification process when it comes to trampolining, but I think there's a change in coaches in that last 12 months leading up to a games if they feel like they are within a sniff of one of their kids or number of kids making the team, because actually sometimes that is a once in a lifetime opportunity for them, and 9 times out of 10 is going to fall on the coach getting it wrong or as best as they can right, even if they've got resources limited, which I know a lot of coaches don't have the resources they need. But that is a hugely emotionally draining experience. And I've heard coaches talk about even Olympic medaling athletes making a team, and it's like, how did you feel? And they were like, relieved. That's you get to a point where it's not exciting and it's amazing, it's a relief.
Yeah, well, they sort of changed things, like the professional gymnastics changed things, that they went to a semi-centralized training structure. So the athletes would spend quite a lot of time at the National Training Centre, and I found that difficult because I'd been part of the journey for so long and like been at all the competitions and things like that. And also suddenly your athletes are now working with, a national coach, a different person. And that was, and that person was fantastic. But at the same point, it was different. And it's something like I'd never really signed up to that. I'd always thought that, I was on a journey too. So sort of my journey got halted a little bit. So it changed things for me personally, but I did not want that to impact on my athletes. So for me, certainly for like Bryony, I didn't want to show any sort of ill feeling or disappointment, or that, because I was just thinking, I have a responsibility to do everything possible to get this woman to the games, like, because she's of that standard, and I know she's phenomenal. So I think as a coach, that's something that you have to just say, well, actually, why am I doing this, and what am I a coach for? And I just had to put any ego to one side. Not that I'm ego driven, but I was just thinking, actually, I know what I've done. Like, I know how much I've given for this athlete, and I know that I've done everything that I possibly can with what I had. So I should feel happy, and I do. But it's like it was different, and immensely about the pressure of the qualification process. Well, in 2016, Bryony had a terrible start to the year. She had some really unfortunate things that happened in her personal life that, impacted her emotionally. And the qualification, she qualified the spot for Great Britain in November 2015 at the Worlds, but there was no guarantee that she would go because she qualified the spot for the country. So it was allocated to Great Britain, not to Bryony. So qualifications weren't going very well at the start of the year. And then there was a moment, it was just like, okay, you first and foremost, a person with feelings and things like that, let's get you sorted first. And then if the Olympics happens, the Olympics happens. If it doesn't, it doesn't, but you've got to be well, you've got to be happy. And then when she sort of, got happy again, because it was all these changes and challenges, things started going better. And I remember just being so unsure. We knew we were going to get the phone call that week in July as to who was picked for the team. They say they're going to phone the athletes. And I just remember knowing the day, just waiting for the phone to ring. And I remember I was just driving past Bramall Lane, past Sheffield United's ground, and my phone went. So I pulled the car over, and it was Bryony, and she was in floods of tears, and I was just like, it's all right, you've been through this before, you can get through it again. And she's like, no, I've been picked for the team. And I just sobbed. I just absolutely cried, and I was just like, okay. And then all I could think about was just don't get injured, just get to the games, just get on, don't pick it, wrap yourself in cotton wool, do whatever you need to, just get to the games. Anything else is a bonus. Just know that what an achievement. And I remember when she first stepped on the trampoline, and I wasn't on the floor, the national coach was on the floor, and I had to pay for myself to go to Rio. And I was sat next to her parents. And when she got on the trampoline, before she'd even started jumping, her mum just turned to me and said, I don't care now, she's an Olympian. So it's just like, whatever happens, she's gone to the Olympic Games. And obviously she got in the final, and then the rest is history. She got that moment when I knew she got a medal. Oh God, it was just insane. It was incredible, and nothing will ever take that moment away. And I remember just, again, crying. I just couldn't stop crying, just because I knew that she'd reached her potential of being an Olympic medalist. And that for me was one of the key things, because whether your athletes are, going to regional level, that's their peak or whatever, you know that they've got result. But when an athlete has got, the ability to go to something, but it's so few people in the world, not even just so few, 16 people in the world get to go to Olympics every 4 years. It's like, that's huge pressure. I obviously, she's had great success, and I'm so proud and everything, but it is a lot of pressure.
So you mentioned there about having to kind of self-fund that journey to Rio, and from that phone call coming in and going, she's going, to that last kind of 6 to 8 weeks for you leading up to it, and your experience of Rio as a coach, especially as a coach who works within that community club system, talk to us about your experience of going to an Olympics.
So obviously, your athlete's selected for a games, you've got to be there. And I wasn't allocated an allocated coaching pass because it was the national coach that would go. And I can't lie, I was disappointed. For me, even if I was a national coach, I would be pushing for the personal coach to go, just because that's me. And it wasn't the system at the time, and it wasn't that coach's fault. And she's a phenomenal coach. And somebody that I hugely respect. But at the same point, I couldn't help being disappointed personally. And I think it's all right to say that now. I can say it. Of course, I was disappointed I didn't get to go to the games as a coach and on the floor. So it was sort of like a huge elation and an amazing feeling, but also the same point I felt this disappointment that, I'd dedicated my life to the sport, and that part for me was cut out by the national governing body. And, and I don't think people really thought about that, like about how that impacted me as a person and my well-being as a coach. I don't think people considered that. Like, it just wasn't considered. It was just performance, performance, performance. And that was hard. Like, it was really difficult, but then I couldn't show it because, I didn't want Bryony to see that. Like, she just had to focus on her. And so you have to be like selfless and just go, well, I've done everything I can. It's out of my control. There's nothing I can do about it. So just try and enjoy as much as you can. And so then I also got the thing of, it was going to cost like $4,000 to go out there for 5 days. So somebody had given me a ticket because they'd booked it in advance and everything. And because our selection is so late, like, the selection was in, I think it was end of June, July, and then the competition's like, several weeks away. So you daren't book a flight because, if your athlete's not going to go, it's a huge expense. Like, as we know, coaches aren't paid that well. So it was like, it was really difficult. And so, somebody had given me their ticket, which was the first step. And then I thought, right, I've just got to book a flight, and then I'll work the rest out. So the flight was, I think it was something like £1,970 by that point. So I just stuck it on a credit card and thought, I just got to deal with this. And if I have to pay it off month by month with loads of interest, then I'll have to do that. And, luckily some other people that were going out there had got a spare bed in their accommodation. It was just a sofa. So it wasn't even a spare bed. It was just a sofa. And they said I could stay on the sofa. And the trampoline community, not just the trampoline community, actually, the coaching community and people, set up a crowdfunding site, and they raised every single penny for me to go to the games. And that was special. That feeling of people would dig into their own pockets to support me to go and watch the athlete that I coached at the games was just like, I felt overwhelmed really, like, and almost that redeemed all the other things that I was feeling, because I was just like, actually, what I've done within the community and how I've made them feel that they wanted to support me. And that was phenomenal, like absolutely phenomenal. And I felt like I got the support of everybody. So yeah, it felt really good.
And then I believe there was a wee incident with Claire Balding after the medal.
Yeah. So yeah, basically, after the medal, I got a call from the BG media team, and they were like, they want you on the Claire Balding interview. So I was like, okay. And at this point, I'd sort of left the arena, so I had to get my way back into the arena. They found me a pass from somewhere, and then I remember I'd had a few drinks because we'd gone out and we were celebrating and things like that. And I remember coming back in, and Chris Hoyer was there as well. And I just remember looking again, oh my God, your legs, they're huge. Like, your legs are massive. Like, and thinking, oh my God. Like, and Brian was like, Paul, this is embarrassing. So I was like, oh God. And anyway, and then we were like, did the Claire Balding interview, and like, Claire Balding's a legend, and I've always liked, watching her on TV. And then I was like, being interviewed by Claire Balding, and because of the time difference, obviously it was on mainstream, prime time TV back over here in the UK. So everybody saw it. So it was such a platform for our sport to get noticed and everything. And it was just incredible. And yeah, I'd say the Claire Balding moment was just as good as everything else. It was amazing.
So obviously and I know a lot of people talk about the post-Olympic blues, and you've got there personally, but your athletes made it. They've achieved their potential. They've come away with a medal. You've had the Claire Balding experience. Life is never going to get any better. And then you've somehow got to get back on the horse. So if we can just do kind of, and I know that period ended up being 5 years, but that next cycle and actually doing it again, because they're not going to, but people could call you lucky. But to go and do it again is extremely hard, on top of what is already ridiculously hard to do in the first place. So just give us a bit of an overview of that period in between.
So there was always a scheduled ankle operation in for Bryony after Rio, so that was always going to be the case, and that ended up being longer than we anticipated because she had to have two surgeries because the first one didn't quite work. So there was a period of time where so at this point as well, like we moved over to the performance center. I really only coached a couple of people, and I decided at that point that I wasn't going to take anybody else on. That once Bryony was finished, that also I was going to move on to my next journey. That I wasn't going to start and do the whole thing again. It's when you take an athlete on, it's 10, 15, 20 years. So it's like I was thinking, right, I'm coming up towards sort of like late 30s. Like at that point, I'm like, right, what do I want as well now? Because I've always been ambitious and I've always wanted to do like lots of different things. And so I'd made the decision that I didn't want to start again and bring a group through and do that, or just spend 6 days a week in the gym. Like I was like, I don't want to do that anymore. So I'd sort of made that decision. So there was a bit of time where, and athletes go through this as well, where there was a bit of a huge dip of that absolutely amazing time of like, wow, this is incredible. And then thinking, God, like, what's next? Like, and so anyway, like there was that period of time where she was injured, and then it was like back on it and, pushing hard again. And then obviously COVID hit. And that was a really weird time. So there was only, very few athletes that were permitted to train during that period of lockdown. And in some ways, COVID really benefited Bryony in that lockdown period because she'd had 2 years out with ankle injury, and it gave her an extra year to really sort of get back on it. So whilst it was, there's no positives about obviously COVID and everything, but the benefit for Bryony is it gave her another year to make, a foot and her ankle even stronger, and she could jump higher. And it was just me and her in the gym for a big period of time. There was only us two permitted to be training. The centre was empty. It was the general manager opened it up. We went into the centre, we trained, and it gave us that space and time to really get back into things and start pushing forwards, which was a phenomenal period of time. But then obviously going to another games, I wasn't permitted to go to Tokyo because of COVID restrictions. And again, the national coach was the one that had the coaching pass. And so I was asked by the BBC to do the 5 Live commentary. And 2 days before, I have never felt as sick or as anxious as possible because, again, not only did I know that this athlete was capable of doing really well because she got a medal, it was now the pressure and the expectation. It was just like, really, she should get another medal. Like, she's capable of it. She's up there with the best. She's beaten the best in the world. And I felt awful. It was really, really strange. The first one, I was so excited that I didn't really care. There was no expectations. The second one, it was like, okay, she's sort of she knows she can do this now because she's, history tells us that. Whereas before her potential was really unknown. And then I remember seeing a routine, and it wasn't the best that she'd been doing, like by far. Like she'd got way more in her, but it was the best that she could do on the day. And I just was so proud of her because I thought to deal with that pressure, and the expectation that wasn't on you before, like, the expectation was like, got to Rio and anything now is a bonus. Final is amazing, but now it's like everybody knows you're capable of getting a medal. So to deal with that pressure just shows the strength of her, and it was phenomenal. And then after that, she was just on it for Worlds. She won Worlds sort of the November after that, and then went to Europeans and was European champion. So, double Olympic medalist, Worlds and European champion. Now's my time to step away. She doesn't need anybody anymore. She's there. She's, as long as she's got somebody to guide her, she's got a phenomenal new coach, Brian Camp. Like he's awesome. He's produced some top athletes produced Olympians, like, world champion, like junior world champions, tons and tons of British champions, and they're working together now. And I'd be really interested because he's got so much more resources than I would have now, like, and is a full-time coach, and I think she could go even better, like, with his guidance. So yeah, it'd be interesting to see moving forward. But yeah, I'm proud of what's happened, and content with what I did with coaching and everything. And now it's somebody else's journey. So, and hopefully I can help people in the future.
So let's talk about the next steps for you then, because I know I've lost all track, but over the various 5 years, we've kind of touched base at various points on your journey. As you know, we've been into pools and into gyms and out of gyms and various other things you've been up to. So when you took that step and you decided kind of, right, something is coming next, how do you find where you're going to plant the flag? Because that's a huge chunk of time to spend in a very vibrant city to then say, right, I'm going to do something different, but what? And where do you kind of find that stimulus and that excitement and motivation for what comes next?
I think for me, it was like the pressure of like high performance and that we know that there's politics in sport, there's politics in everything that you do and everything. And I sort of was just tired of it all and needed a break from it. And I absolutely love like going out walking and like hiking and things like that. That's where I switch off, and that's where my happy place is. And particularly in like Scotland, like I remember going to Loch Lomond and Loch Long, and I just felt like connected to like the landscape and everything like that. And I just was like, I want to retire here. And then there was that moment of a couple of colleagues of mine actually passed away last year, and they were only in their 60s, early 60s, and they were both were due to retire that year. And I was like, no, life's too short, and if you want to do something, you've got to do it, as I've always done with coaching. So I was like, no, I'm gonna sell up. I'm content with what I've done with sport. Bryony's world European champion. I'm going to move to the west coast of Scotland where my heart is, and the rest will work itself out. And now I'm here. I live in the middle of nowhere. It's not even a village. There's no pub. There's no shops. And it's just an incredible place to live. It's phenomenal. And I just made the decision that now was the time, and that it was sort of my next chapter. So bought an old stone cottage, an 1870s cottage on the west coast of Scotland. Didn't have a job up here, so was still going to be commuting back to Sheffield. But then suddenly a job appeared at the University of Stirling, and it was just perfect for me. So I applied, I got the job, and I moved in August. So started my new job as program director for sport development and coaching at University of Stirling. So I'm here now. So it's incredible.
Well, I think it takes a lot to take that leap, because I think whether it's nostalgia, whether it's ego, whether it's the allure of just high performance sport, I think some people, and if they choose to, obviously it's up to them, but I think dedicate their whole life to it, but perhaps get to a point where they put the rest of their life on hold for too long and then sometimes realize it too late. So it sounds like you've made an incredible call there. And I think being in the situation you are now, that's probably put you in, I guess, a more reflective mood. Like you've got more time and space to breathe, if you like.
Yeah, and literally, like that's what I've been doing. My priorities have changed, my desires have changed. I'm still a little bit lost as to exactly what my next journey is with regards to sort of like me as a coach, because I'll always be a coach, but it's like I want to support other people to actually sort of improve, develop, and progress. So I see myself more as a mentor and developer now. But I'm not sure who, where, what. But for now, it's like, I'm just going to concentrate on settling into Stirling, just taking in like this beautiful scenery. I am doing workshops with varying different countries and clubs and coaches. So, I just got back from Lisbon, working with the Portuguese coaches, and 54 coaches from up and down the country from Portugal all came to do my weekend workshop, which I was just honoured that people travelled as far as they did to come and work with me. And it was phenomenal. And I mean, they're men of the current world champions. So, they know what they're talking about, but yet still they were so hungry for information and things like that it was a real honour and privilege to work with them. So I see myself doing more things like that in the future, and just, unlocking other people's potential moving forward. So I think that's my next chapter. But I'm enjoying the west coast of Scotland and all it has to offer right now.
It's funny because, after Rio, one of my friends got silver as well, actually. And he said, at some point, you need to come up to Scotland and I'll take you surfing. And me and one of my other friends, we came up from London. But it's pre-pandemic, but quite a few years back now. And he took us right up to the North Coast. And that it's, I don't know if it's just a sport thing or it's being near a city thing, but I think the mental space that gives you is something very special. You almost feel like you've left the planet where your brain can just completely switch off.
And you can. And sometimes like, I'll go and look at like some of the scenery around here, and like you can't see it today because it's all cloudy, but like I can see a mountain from my conservatory, and sometimes it's got snow on the top of it, and it's just like, wow, it's magical, absolutely magical. And yeah, I have to pinch myself sometimes to think like God, I live here. Like it's and driving around the locks and just the scenery. I mean, the other day I drove to the local town, and the sky was completely clear and the locks were so still, they were like mirrors. So you just got the reflection of the mountains, and it was just like, wow. And I just kept turning and going, wow, this is incredible. That's definitely good for the soul. It's just my next chapter now.
So the final thing I want to touch upon, I guess, is now you're in this kind of reflective period and still perhaps figuring out the next bit of the journey, but looking back, what are maybe your top couple or three bits of either wisdom or just advice to yourself that you've taken from this incredible journey that's lasted more than 20 years?
So I would say knowledge and education are the key things, because we can all learn things, and so we can switch off and like put your head in the sand, but actually we can learn about all the different things. So knowledge and education is the key thing for me, and get that as soon as you can. So you're coaching with informed practice rather than just coaching how you've been coached. So that's the easiest trap to fall down, is to just coach how you've been coached. And it's like, it might be great, but is there another way of doing things? Is there a better way of doing things? The other thing I would say is make sure that you look after yourself, because often as coaches, we're always looking out for other people and making sure that everybody's got what they need. What have you got that you need? And there's some great research and some work from Dr. Peter Olusoga from Sheffield University, and he looked at like the stress in high performance coaching, and read up about it, find out about it, and make yourself aware of it so that you don't get caught up in that. And the other thing that I would say is, no matter what level you're at or where you want to get to, don't tread on anybody to get one up, because on your route up to the top, if you step on people or you disregard them and things like that, then when you're on your way back down, they'll still be there. And it's just like, always just be respectful of everybody. And just because somebody's not working at elite level doesn't mean they're not a good coach. It just means they're a different coach at a different level. And so check in with yourself and make sure that you're being a good person first and foremost.
That's a wonderful bit of advice to pull it together. And looking at the excitement and the achievements and everything else that you have achieved, and I don't just mean this from a high performance point of view, but I think, like you mentioned earlier, the whole community piece and that touching different people's lives, I'd be really interested to see what happens next. So I think we might, maybe episode 200 will pick up this conversation and see where it's all going. But Paul, I'm really grateful. I know we've been talking for quite a while now, and I'll make sure I put the links to everything you're up to and your social medias in the notes below so that people can kind of keep an eye on what's going on. Because I see you post various things on Instagram where you're in different parts of the world and what's been going on, and it's fascinating. So yeah, just really grateful for you sharing some time with us today.
More than happy. Yeah, thank you for inviting me.
A huge thank you for joining us today. You can connect with today's guest and all our Rogue Monkey podcast socials through the links below this episode. If you're involved in a business, we would also love for you to check out our collaboration with Richard Cheetham MBE, our episode 44 guest, the link to which is also in the show notes. Finally, just a quick reminder to subscribe to the podcast, however you're joining us today, and please do pass this episode on to at least one person you think would take inspiration from it. Have a great week, and thanks again for being part of the Rogue Monkey podcast community.